It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Al, last week, Americans saw the removal of Robert E. Lee, the statue in Richmond, and just last night, the Talbot County Council voted 3-2 to remove its Confederate memorial statue from the county courthouse green. Many see these as significant progressive or Black Lives Matter victories, but could there be some unanticipated political consequences for these decisions? Could they be used as rallying cries for conservatives and the Trump wing of the Republican Party?
To be honest with you, the decision to remove it is more of an American victory. America has been a quest to live up to the ideal of all men being created equal, and this is a sign of progress. Our founders said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, we've never quite lived up to that. And we certainly didn't at the time of the Declaration of Independence. But American history has really been a never-ending quest to try to get to that ideal. And today we're about as close as we've been probably ever to doing it. America's changing rapidly. It's becoming a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy in a way that it has never been. And as we go through those changes, we're also taking, and as we get closer to our basic ideal, we're also taking another look at history, thinking about things that we've ignored as we've studied American history over our first 2.5 centuries. And in that context, you look at the Confederacy, and the Confederacy was a revolution. It was an insurgency that fought against the United States of America. And it fought specifically to deny progress toward our founding ideal. So it's hard for me to argue that statues that memorialize heroes of the Confederacy, no matter what some people in the local communities might think, have any place on publicly paid for grounds. From the political perspective, Trumpism has really been sort of the latest resistance to American progress toward that ideal of equal opportunity. And we see it in a lot of ways in the Trump wing of the Republican Party through voter suppression being one of the most important. But to be honest with you, what I see Trumpism is, it's an effort to really block the idea that, one, everybody's equal, and secondly, that majority should in the end rule. So personally, if this energizes the Trump wing of the Republican Party as a Democrat, I'm pretty happy about that, because, and we'll maybe discuss this later, but as we saw last night in California, and I think we'll see throughout the election cycle, Trumpism itself is a declining part of the electorate. And if you saw last week what Governor Christie said, finally breaking away, that's an indication that I think Republicans, as they look to the future, even some who were very strong for Donald Trump, don't want to be burdened with Trumpism. So as a Democrat, more power to Trump.
Craig, you're a little bit closer to the Talbot Boys than Al is, at least physically. What's your take on that particular issue and how it translates into a national perspective?
This issue has been taken up and debated ever since I moved into the area almost 6 years ago. And I suspect the debate's going to continue. And I don't mean in any way to suggest it's not important to a number of people. It's very important. But in terms of a national political issue, even a maybe state issue, I just don't think the statute here is going to be determinative when it comes to future elections. There's so many other issues that we face locally and we face on a statewide basis, certainly on a national basis. You know, I thought Al's discussion and view of this is, as always, very well thought out. But maybe I just come at it a little bit from a little simpler direction. I don't know. I don't really believe that we have to place statues or sculpture at a location in perpetuity. So I've never had a big issue with the fact that things could be moved that were once put in a particular place. And then Al suggested this, the place is one of the problems here, and that is it's not only on public ground, but it's at a courthouse. I mean, it's a place where people come seeking justice, and it has therefore perhaps a symbolism that's greater than it would be if it was certainly was on private land or maybe even another government location. You know, it's always hard to relate to this. On the one hand, I would actually not want anything to remain in place if it could be moved that friends and neighbors found discomforting or objectionable. I played in high school in a high school team where our mascot was related to the American Indian, and there was a totem pole in front of our school, and that became offensive to people after years and years went by, and it was moved. And I didn't object to that. I thought if it was an issue for people that there were certainly other alternatives, and I guess that's the way I feel about this. The vote taken this week on 3-2 is probably fairly representative of where the community is. I think there are very loud views on both sides, but I think most of the people in Talbot County tend to care less, but the majority tend to believe it's time to see the statute move on. There was some discussion of actually adding a Union soldier, and that idea came from a citizen who's a friend of mine who about 4 or 5 years ago said, well, maybe there's a better alternative. And unfortunately, it didn't really get a hearing then. It didn't get offered this week, but it has been taken more seriously. And I guess, that's an alternative. But I think at this point in time, it is probably time for the statue to find another location. And hopefully that can be done. And once that's done, I don't know that there's a long-lasting cause that's going to affect politics locally or in the state. But at least I hope that's the case.
Ending on a upbeat note, at least for the predictions of Fuller and Fromm, both of you got the California recall election correctly. Gavin Newsom retains his position as governor. But I have to say, the Republicans did not come up with a particularly strong candidate. And I just wonder if it was just because of the weakness of the field that this was such a landslide victory. Greg, I'll say with you.
Well, I'm from California, but I haven't lived there for quite a while. I'm always a little reluctant to make a determination about how much California is a predictor of anything across the rest of the nation. I do think there are some factors that both parties will pay attention to. Number one, to your point, the Republican challenger that was rising to the top of a short list was viewed as very conservative, was a fairly weak contender. There was an alternative, or maybe more than one alternative, but the person got no traction because this very conservative Republican Party there wanted to support the most conservative of the Republican choices being offered. And another factor, and we've talked about this before on the program, the Republican Party in California, like it is in other states, is shrinking. I saw a statistic today, which I was unaware of, and that is that, if accurate, the Republican Party in California, or those who say they state they're Republican, is actually a smaller number than the people that decline to state what party they're in. And so it's not as though there's a strong Democrat, strong Republican party in contention here. Republicans are greatly weakened. The numbers are much smaller. And so that makes a difference. And you have to have an exceptionally strong Republican candidate who can win votes in the middle if you're going to be successful, I think. And when we saw that wasn't the case here. And I think also, we mentioned this last week, some of the issues that are getting so much attention, where you've got strong conservative Republicans advancing measures on abortion, voting rights, COVID vaccinations, those kinds of issues probably fire up the base of this increasingly smaller Republican Party, but they do not win over votes in the middle. And so I think there are a lot of lessons to be paid attention to in this California race. And part of it's just the math, and where the math, whether it's a congressional district or a statewide race, where the math looks a little bit like California, I think Republicans will not do well if they nominate and put forward a candidate out of touch with the mainstream of his or her state.
Al, you have the last word this time.
But I did go over the exit polls this morning, and there are a couple of things that stuck out. And again, California may not be absolutely representative, but because, for example, in California, college graduates were 49% of the electorate yesterday. That's a lot higher than they're going to be nationally. But the continued movement of college-educated voters, particularly in the suburbs, to the Democrats is an important trend. And the most interesting thing I found in the exit polls is college graduates were the strongest for Gavin Newsom, stronger than African Americans in terms of percentage, one, stronger than Hispanics. The second thing that I think is important is Gavin Newsom got good marks for handling the coronavirus. And the third thing was that when Gavin thought he might be in trouble only because the Democrats weren't paying attention to the race, he used Trump. And he ran hard against Trump and Trumpism. And as Craig said, the leading Republican candidate was not a strong candidate, but he wanted to be a Trump clone. And, he was whining before the election that maybe there was a lot of fraud and all of that. I mean, he basically was mini Trump, and that proved very effective for Gavin. The other interesting thing on in the exit polls is, while it didn't really affect the outcome, that one of the sneaky issues in this that could portend something for next year in this recall was inflation. I think close to 60% said inflation was either somewhat or completely unmanageable. And that's something to take a look at as you're looking ahead. Now, what California, I think, did show was the Trump dilemma for the Republicans, and Craig really described it. If you want to win a Republican primary in a lot of places, you got to back Donald Trump. But if you happen to be in a district that isn't completely Republican, then you're going to have a very hard time in the general election. So in that sense, what we might see is seen as sort of a template for what the Democrats might do next year. Now, I've said before, and I believe this, the odds are very much against the Democrats in the House. So they're going to have an uphill fight no matter what. But, running against Trump, running against the Texas abortion bill, which will energize women like they were energized in 2018, and also continue to continuing the appeal to college-educated voters, I think will be what you see. What you're going to see. And what that means is that particularly with college educated voters, Democrats have to be very careful not to do the things that scare them back into the Republican camp. I hope we will not hear a lot of talk about socialism and defunding the police as over the next year. But what does it mean for what we're going to see in the next few months? One, I think you're going to see President Biden go completely as hard as he can to get this pandemic under control, because that's really the key. If you can't do that, the economy won't completely recover, and it'll be, and Democrats will have no chance. And so you just got to take the heat from the Republican nutcases who want to kill their constituents by not letting them get vaccinated. They need to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill quickly. I think then they need to move toward a sensible reconciliation bill. A lot of the new spending ought to go for climate change, because I think the weather patterns have really awakened America to this problem. But also try to do a bill that's going to avoid the obvious inflationary tag. And finally, a very important thing happened this week, and that was that the Democratic Senate, with Joe Manchin and Amy Klobuchar and Reverend Warnock and others, put together a voting rights bill that does deal with what the damage the Republicans are trying to do to our electoral system, and has the strong support of Senator Manchin. Now, I think that has an actual chance of moving. Schumer says he's going to have a vote on it next week, and that's the one carve out to the filibuster that I would think Democrats might want to think about. But sort of building on California, you see a template for an agenda that could maybe give us a chance to stay close in the House and hold on to the Senate next year.
Well, we have to end it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.